Well, good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Gail Gibson, President of Essex County College, and it is indeed my pleasure to welcome you to the first installment of the 2014-15 Presidential Lecture Series. Before I begin, I would like to recognize a couple of guests. First and foremost, I would like to recognize our trustees, Trustee Julene Grimes, and I see my board chairman of the trustees tipping in, Trustee Clement. I would also like to take a minute to just ask those special guests of Dr. Clement Price. There's some here that have worked with him and some who have been his former students. That's like back in 1970 something. And they can please stand for me. All of Dr. Price's special guests.
Oh, that's nice. Oh.
Thank you for being here on this occasion. And last and not, I would like to thank all of you, our Essex County College students, faculty, and staff for being here on this first presidential lecture series. Give yourselves a round of applause. The purpose of this series, which was launched last year in February 2014, is to give our internal and external stakeholders access to thought leaders who have achieved national and international prominence within their respective industries. The college's interrelated core values are the foundation for this presidential lecture series initiative: teaching and learning, excellence and accountability, community and engagement, diversity and access, legacy and transformation. Discussions that stem from this series are intended to inspire our students to become change agents and civic-minded leaders in their communities and in their professions. Our slogan, "Exceed Expectations," is more than just a tagline. It represents our institutional self-definition. In addition to describing the college's strategic and cultural direction, it represents the mindset of excellence that our students, faculty, and staff are highly encouraged to embrace. As the college evolves, we keep our doors of opportunity open for attractive partnerships with the educational, professional, residential, and civic communities. Our capacity to transform lives is linked with our ability to provide constituents with resources for excelling in the 21st century. This lecture series is a vehicle for achieving this objective. As you can tell from this very important initiative, that it is very, very close and dear to my heart. And we spend a lot of time reading and lecturing about those who have made such significant contributions to our society. But there's nothing more like being able to make and hear their wisdom firsthand. One individual that has done so much for Newark, so much for Essex County College, and higher education in general is none other than our Dr. Clement A. Price. As our 2014 honorary degree recipient, it is so fitting that he is able to be here with us to share his wealth of knowledge. I'd like to give you some background information on the person that we will have speak to us today. At 22 years old, with a bachelor's and a master's degree from the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, Dr. Clement A. Price was deciding between two teaching jobs offers. One at Essex County College, which had just opened its doors and had an uncertain future, and another at Tuskegee University, founded in 1881, whose first teacher was Booker T. Washington. But in those tumultuous 60s, and teaching in Alabama seemed more risky than staying in Newark, where he was born and raised. Thus, Dr. Price became one of the youngest and first faculty members of the inaugural Essex County College staff. In 1969, were you guys born back then? No. In 1969, he entered the doctorate program at Rutgers University and was also hired there as an adjunct faculty member, which ended his brief but meaningful time at Essex County College. Having earned a PhD from Rutgers in 1975, Dr. Price rapidly rose to prominence at both Rutgers and in the state of New Jersey. Because of his positive experience, he always kept ties with Essex County College. Today, he is a renowned Rutgers University Newark Distinguished Service Professor of History. He's also Newark's official city historian, and he is the vice chair of President Obama's Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. But despite his often hectic schedule, Dr. Price frequently visits Essex County College, making himself available to consult, especially with me, to speak and also participate in various panel discussions and other public programs. In addition to his teaching duties, Dr. Price has been published widely and has written books on topics that explore Afro-American history, race relations, and modern culture in New Jersey as well as across the United States. His publications include two books, Freedom Not Far Distant, a documentary history of African Americans in New Jersey, and Many Voices, Many Opportunities, Cultural Pluralism, and American Arts Policies. He's also a trustee of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, which funds educational, cultural, social, and environmental projects, and he is the president of the Newark Trust and chair of the Save Ellis Island Foundation. For 26 years, Dr. Price has been married to Mary Sue Sweeney Price, who recently retired as the director of the Newark Museum. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, we're going to have a short video, and then it will be our pleasure. The next voice after the video will be none other than after the video. Dr. Clement A. Price. Thank you so much.
The city of Newark has a new official historian, but he is not a newcomer to New Jersey's largest city. He's Dr. Clement Price, the award-winning Rutgers history professor and a longtime leader in some of this state's most important social and cultural organizations.
The Board of Governors Distinguished Service Professor of History and Director of the Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience at Rutgers Newark. His honors are many, too many to enumerate here. But in this context, let me say that he is Mr. Newark, the consummate citizen who every day works for the improvement of his beloved city.
An unbelievably gifted student of the American experience, the American urban experience, and this experience of the great city of Newark, in particular, deeply, deeply knowledgeable and renowned for his understanding of African American culture and a civic leader. He's just a fantastic gift to this great city.
Clement.
Professor Clement Alexander Price.
Dr. Price?
Welcome to our stage. Clem, come on out.
Let me start off with thanks to Dr. Gibson for that extraordinary introduction. She has outed me as a member of AARP. If you don't know what AARP is, you're too young for your own good. Hey, Barbara. There are too many friends and colleagues and associates for me to acknowledge, but I do want to thank Calvin Suga for being here, the chair of the Board of Trustees of this great American institution of higher learning And I just need to thank my Rutgers colleague, my dean, Sherry Ann Butterfield, who broke out of the dean's office to be here. Thank you, Sherry. All right. To the faculty, the trustees, and the students of Essex County College, you humble me, really. This is not what I expected. Such a throng, such an introduction, such a video, and such a moment. This college profoundly honored me back in June with an honorary degree, and that kind of completed a circle for me, because my academic career and my civic career began here in 1968, which is more than a lifetime ago for some who don't live very long. And this is the second honor to be asked by the president to give a presidential lecture. Where I come from, that's a lecture that should have some heft, some stature.
You're a hat.
I remember 1968 very well. I came here from Bridgeport, Connecticut with a freshly minted master's from the University of Bridgeport. I knew I wanted to be a historian, and as President Gibson noted, I had 2 job offers. That was so long ago you could get a job offer in an academy with a master's degree. So 2 job offers, one from Essex County College and one from Tuskegee Institute. Now Tuskegee Institute, you students of history know, is one of the most remarkable institutions of higher learning in the world. At one point in the early 20th century, Tuskegee was seen as the capital of the Negro world. This is before Harlem, before Boston, DC, where I'm from, were seen as crossroads of the modern black experience. But nobody in their right mind, certainly not me, would go to Alabama in 1968. The issues there had not been resolved. So I came to Newark and came to Essex in search of a safe and friendly haven, and that's exactly what I found. But I should note that this college was born during a very tense period in the history of Newark, the history of the county, and the history of the United States and beyond. The college opened a year after Newark's near rendezvous with disaster, better known as the Rebellion to some, or the Revolution, or the long hot summer of 1967. And although the disturbances had died down, indeed had ended, the town that I landed in, August of 1968, was still riddled with anxiety. Not only here in Newark, but in East Orange, in Irvington, in New Jersey. What had happened in Newark in July of 1967? And the college had to respond to that query. I mean, there was a rumor in town that many people, I guess county officials, didn't want to put the college here. Who's going to start an institution in a town that just nearly committed civic suicide? So there was a rumor, a very powerful rumor, that the college actually was to be moved to suburban Essex County. That's where the population was heading, that's where the wealth was heading, and that's where the prestige was heading. So the decision to place the college in Newark was the beginning of the Newark that we have inherited. Reinvest in Newark. But I remember the anxiety. Indeed, just a few months after Dr. King was assassinated, that's when I started teaching here. My classes self-segregated, the black kids and the brown kids usually sat together, and the kids on their way to whiteness sat together. Everybody in 1968 was not quite white, but they were on their way to becoming white ethnic Americans with the privileges that come with whiteness. That's what I remember from that year. I was 22 years old, a kid. I hadn't published a sentence. I had never taught a class. I was unsure whether the professoriate was going to rise up and address my ambition, my values, the kind of kid that Anna and James Leo Price wanted to raise. All of that played out in that year of 1968. I remember that what made a difference for me is that I was surrounded by some wonderful students. Some of them are here. I mean, in those days, students really, really looked up to professors, even if they were 22 years old, even if they were without a doctoral degree, even if they had not published. When I first stepped into a class, I think it was Foundations of Modern Society, the students applauded. That's something you don't do at a county college. You do that at Princeton, but not at a county college. But they did it here. And I was mentored by fellow professors who were a tad older than I was. And they urged me to work on writing powerful, meaningful lectures, to mentor my students, to serve as a paragon of virtue, and I tried to do that. But I was a kid professor. I'd like to talk this morning about the complicated history and memory in Newark. And I'd like to just briefly talk about Essex County College. Where is Essex in the narrative, the historical narrative of Newark? I think most of you know that in less than 2 years, in 2016, Newark will observe the 350th anniversary of its founding, when a small band of Connecticut Puritans landed on the banks of the Passaic River. They negotiated with the locals, the Lenape Indians, and founded what would be, in fact, the last Puritan haven in North America. The last Puritan haven in North America. If you want to know anything about Newark's spiritual history, walk along King Boulevard. Walk along Bergen Street, and you'll sense that this is a city on a hill. And the Puritans were convinced that God resided here. And they founded what was, for about 50, 60 years, a Puritan theocracy. Okay? That Newark is so old, 350 years. Only New York and Boston are older. So Newark, by American standards, or let's say Anglo-American standards, is an ancient city. And I say Anglo-American standards because in our Anglo-centric American narrative, we ignore the cities and towns founded by the Spanish-speaking people who also shared North America. But that Newark is so old means that we've been celebrating our history or observing our history for quite a while. In 1916, Newark made a big deal about its 250th anniversary. A big deal. Nothing like that had ever happened in Newark, where Newark said, we are old, we are modern, we are progressive, and we're going to look and behave like a major American city. There are remnants of that anniversary. If you walk downtown, you see these great statues. You see these great parks, Washington Park, military park. The military park had been there for quite a while, since the 18th century. But Lincoln Park, which was the last park, kind of carved out by the city fathers for public and private use. That was a big deal. So they celebrated the rise of Newark. The rise of Newark from what it once was. Newark was a gritty, unhealthy, unsightly city during much of the 19th century. Indeed, as the 19th century drew to a close, Newark was designated by the federal census as a very unhealthy city. The unhealthiest city in the United States in 1890. Let me show you how race works in Newark. One of the reasons why Newark was so unhealthy at that time is because it was a racial city, a racialized city. In many ways, a racist city. Now, the race that was problematic for Protestant American-born whites were not blacks. Blacks were few in numbers, browns even fewer. But there was a large Irish population in Newark. And the Irish shared a certain kind of space with blacks. Their major difference being that they were never enslaved on American soil as the blacks were. So you have a situation in the 19th century which made Newark gritty, unhealthy, and not especially beautiful. By the time Newark turned 250 years of age, city fathers sought to change that. And they did something very interesting. They built monuments, statues, created parks, and they had an extraordinary celebration of the city. 100 distinguished Newarkers constituted a so-called committee of 100. Can you imagine? 100 people deciding on how to celebrate anything. That's what they did. And let me just show you. This is an image of Newark on the Trent, after which our Newark was named. This is one of the great 19th century writers, Stephen Crane. Okay, Newark has always been a town of literary giants. Crane, Roth, Baraka, Coppola, all these writers kind of capturing the narrative, some of Newark or the narrative of the American experience. Now this guy is important, John Cotton Dana, who comes to Newark in 1902 as the director, second director of the great Newark Public Library, one of the great libraries in North America. The fact that Dana came here really mattered because he took the library, and you can see it if you go in the library, and you should go in the library and say, Dana is still here, because what you can do in the Newark Public Library, you can wander the stacks. The library is among the most public, open, and accessible public spaces in Newark. And that's because of John Cotton Dana, and you see a picture of the Newark Public Library. And in 1909, what does Dana do? He says this city needs a museum. Great cities have museums. So he starts a museum on the 4th floor of the library. And that museum, of course, is the equally great Newark Museum. If you haven't been in the Newark Museum in the last 3 months, you gotta work on that. If you haven't been in the Newark Public Library over the last week or two, you gotta work on that. These public institutions enable Newark to survive a very difficult second half of the last century. You take the Newark Public Library out of Newark, I don't think Newark makes it. Take the museum out of Newark, NJPAC never goes up. You take that public sector where people like John Cotton Dana and Thomas McCarter and Bill Ashby, these wonderful people essentially envisioned Newark becoming great. And all of that happens around 1915. Now, this is one of my favorite images from the celebration of 1915. This is, as I said to someone yesterday, this is a feminized and racialized image of what Newark wanted to be seen as. White, industrial, and an object of affection. All of that kind of woven through this poster. 50th anniversary celebration. Okay. It was a heady time, and the city fathers and mothers wanted to say to the world that Newark had arrived. Now, there's nothing wrong with commemoration, especially when it is done on behalf of local pride, when it is done in search of a larger civic culture that binds the citizens together, okay? And in 2016, that's one of the objectives of our celebration, using commemoration to pull Newark together. I think we will do a better job than they did in 1916. In 1916, the city fathers and mothers pretty much ignored that the city had changed. They sentimentalized, romanticized the Puritan founders. They sentimentalized and romanticized industrialization without noting that industrialization had polluted the Passaic River, without admitting that Newark was a terribly unhealthy city, without admitting that there were no fountains in Newark. There were very few playgrounds in Newark. That the poor people in Newark, whether they were black or white or black or on their way to whiteness, lived in some terrible, terrible houses. I mean, the old Third Ward where the Jews lived was a terrible place to live. Jewish leaders spoke out against that. Housing, the way they were treated by the police. Maybe one of the reasons why a group of Jewish women started Beth Israel Hospital. Okay? Every ethnic group in Newark has had difficulty being treated fairly in the healthcare system. And that's why you have Beth Israel Hospital, Old Community Hospital, which was the black hospital, started in the 1920s by Booker T. Washington's personal physician, John Kinney. St. Michael's Hospital. All of these hospitals were ethnic hospitals because the city clung to whiteness when the white population was actually the minority, outnumbered by Italians, Jews, Poles, and blacks were on their way. Fast forward to 2014. Or 2016, I'm sorry. How should Newark, take this home with you, how should Newark, about to turn 350 years of age, acknowledge its advancement? How do you do that? Should we celebrate our history? If so, what can be celebrated here? Do we admit that the 19th century set up the 20th century as very problematic? Do we remind ourselves that Newark has always had a problem with race? Whether one was black, brown, Jewish, Italian, Polish, Puerto Rican, Dominican? And if we admit that, does that get in the way of the celebration? In 1916, saying this to one of my students the other day, in 1916, they knew that blacks were on their way. The Great Migration had started. So they wanted to put blacks in the celebration, in the pageant. So what they did, they got a truckload of black people, put them in the back of a truck, and put watermelons in the truck, and had them sing songs of the piney South. Is that an appropriate way to acknowledge the presence of people of African ancestry? I think not. But if you admit that, does that get in the way of celebration? So one of the things I hope we can do in 2016 is to commemorate, celebrate, and have a reality check. Have a year-long history lesson. Weave history back into the Newark schools. They stopped teaching civics in Newark in the 1960s, and I suspect this comes from Gus Henningberg. The late Gus Henningberg told me, Clem, they stopped teaching civics when the city became increasingly black, as if they refused to pass the torch of how do you behave in a town like that? How do you comport yourself in Branch Brook Park? Why you never put graffiti on public art? That's a way of insulting your neighborhood, turning your back on your city. So we have a lot of catching up to do, and I hope that 2016 will be that year where Newark galvanizes its civic spirit, refurbishes its memory of itself, and takes very seriously the virtues of being so old. Do we celebrate the great corporate, educational, and civic institutions in Newark? Prudential, New Jersey Bell, Verizon, the University of Newark, Rutgers in Newark, UMD&J. Do we celebrate those institutions? Or by 2016, has time come to say, these institutions, as great as they were for the longest time, not really accessible to the cross-section of people who live here. Okay? That's a very important part of what we hope to do in 2016. Should we celebrate Newark's remarkable emergence as an important American city without acknowledging why Newark was nearly undermined as a great American city? A lot of people in Newark, maybe some people in this wonderful auditorium, wonderful audience, a lot of people in Newark, certainly beyond Newark, believe that Newark's infamous decline begins in July of 1967. If someone says that to you, you are listening to someone who has not read a book in the last 25 years. We have known for 25 years that a number of forces came together in the 1930s to set this city up for near failure. Housing policy, transportation policy, great corporations that would not open its doors to blacks, or some of them not to Jews. I mean, Prudential Insurance Company, for the longest time, essentially a safe haven for Irish Americans. All right? Very few Jews in that corporation. No blacks. Little anecdote. One of the smartest black kids to come out of Newark graduated, not surprisingly, from Wheat-Wake High School. Okay? Graduated Wheat-Wake 1957. He ultimately became one of the smartest, most widely published historians in the United States. His name is James Oliver Horton. James Oliver Horton, black kid, graduates near the top of the class, 1957, at Wheat-Wake. Took a test to get a job at Prudential. They told him he failed. And when you graduate at the top of Wheat-Wake, whether you're black or Jewish, whether your heritage takes you back to Russia or to Georgia, you know that you're not going to fail a test at Prudential. Okay? Never got into Prudential. but he went on to get a PhD and actually spoke at the Marion Thompson Wright Lecture a few years ago. Google James Oliver Horton. He's one of the leading American historians to put a human face on enslaved Americans. He was one of the first historians to take a look at the importance of free black communities in the New Orleans states. He was a bad brother, but could not get a job at Prudential. So with this in mind, I would like for the 350th anniversary of Newark's founding to be part commemorative. I hope that we can raise enough funds to clean up some of these great statues that were built in the early 20th century. If you're not into public art, you might as well start today. It's a lovely day. Walk past the Gutzon Borglum statue in Military Park and tell me you're not moved by the grandeur of that statue. Or do what people used to do before Newark started declining in the 1950s and 60s. Moms and dads in Newark used to take their kids and have them sit next to President Lincoln. All right? Sit next to the president. If you don't know, the statue was, again, by Gutzon Borglum, one of the great sculptors of the 20th century. And the statue is called the Seated Lincoln. Okay, the Seated Lincoln. When I take people around Newark, if there's a small group, we get out of the minibus, we walk across the street, walk right across the street here, and sit with the president. And you feel the power of art. And if you're looking east, and you have to look east, because that's the direction that President Lincoln, or his image is looking east. And you can see how Newark rises up from the Passaic River. A full generation of kids have not sat next to President Lincoln, have not walked around the Gutzon Borglum statue, have not walked through Military Park, the revivified Military Park. If you haven't seen Military Park in the last 3 months, do yourself a favor. Take a walk through. You would think you were in Brooklyn. No, you're in Newark, the new Newark that is coming into focus, coming into high relief, coming to know itself through art, through civic culture, through citizenship, and through change. So Newark is a legacy city. By legacy, we obviously mean old, but by legacy, we also mean that we have some assets that Short Hills could never have. We have some assets that Los Angeles can never have. Think about these other American cities that are legacy cities, and all of them are struggling to do what Newark has been doing for the last 45 years since this college was founded. They're trying to recreate civic space, civic culture. Stop tearing down old buildings. Clean up statues that have been marred by graffiti. Create an ethos of fellowship between blacks, whites, and browns. Reconnect the city to the suburbs and vice versa. And just for your general information, the legacy cities that have bought into this movement where a lot of old cities no longer call themselves post-industrial. What does that mean? What does a smokestack city mean? For that matter, what does brick city mean? Okay? But when you call yourself a legacy city, you're admitting your stature, your age. And here are the legacy cities. Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, New York. And all of those cities are struggling, mightily so, to recover what they lost. And I think that Newark is near the top of that list, given what has happened here since this college was founded. So legacy cities are historically iconic places. All right, so let me bring this to closure. We've been through a lot in this town. The federal government wasn't kind to Newark. And this was a white ethnic city. Those who were really white perceived that Newark wasn't going to make it because too many Italians, too many Jews, too many second-generation Americans of immigrant status. And wherever blacks lived in Newark, those areas were treated as if they had already failed. It was the beginning of a phenomenon that we finally now see as a dastardly deed, the redlining of communities. Redlining took hold of Newark, St. Louis, Detroit. Most of the legacy cities experienced redlining to their detriment. We are now more than a generation removed from that, and we don't do that anymore. So, since this college was founded, we witnessed plummeting populations. We witnessed several seasons of local cynicism, skepticism. We witnessed the tenacious hold of racial antipathy on us. When I started taking people around Newark some years ago, the more candid members of my tour would say, you know, Dr. Price, I haven't been to Newark 30 years. I didn't know it was still here. And then you take them to where their grandparents are buried, where they were bar mitzvah, where they went to school. I took an elderly white lady through Newark, and I found the house in which she was raised, the church where she was married. She went to Ridge Street School, which still stands. And at the end of the tour, I asked her, where'd you go to high school? She said, Barringer. I was like, Barringer, where else? So we made our way to Barringer, and we found the lovely Barringer Archives, which is like an extraordinary archive in that school, still there. And she found her yearbook from Barringer. It's a class of 1946. She found her picture. And it was one of those powerful moments. You know, I study history as an abstraction, but to see someone connect with a tangible object, their yearbook, their elementary school, the house in which one was married, the church in which one was baptized, that's when history and memory intersect, and that's when you feel like a human being. And that's when the legacy of Newark kicks in, and you fall in love with the city all over again. All right, so back to Essex County College. Essex County College was born at a time when Newark's precipitous post-World War II decline had all but run its course. A lot of people believe that 67 was the beginning of Newark's decline. It actually was the beginning of a reinvention of Newark. Okay? And the college played a role in that. When I arrived here in 1968, there was, to be sure, civic despair in the city and in the county. But this college, on multiple levels, became a safe, an optimistic haven, not just for me, but for my students, for the staff, and the administrators. Most of you are too young to realize that 31 Clinton Street was a haven in a city that had just nearly destroyed itself. I was saying to Dr. Gibson, she liked the idea, which means it's going to happen. We should put a plaque on that building. Right, Charlotte? Should put a plaque on that building. That's a historic structure because the college started there. The anxieties of Newark kind of bled into the college, but they were challenged at the college. I remember very well, I believe I told President Gibson the story. Bob, you'll remember, Anthony Imperiale was the kind of folk hero of old Italian Newark. And the rumor cut across campus that he wanted to start a group at Essex County College called SPA. No, not SPA, SPONGE. The Society for the Prevention of Negroes Getting Everything. SPONGE. The rumor actually had traction because my fellow professors, knowing how young and dumb I really was, they said, well, Clem, you should speak to Imperiale and tell him to stay off campus. So I met with Anthony Imperiale. I was 22 years old. You know, I knew he was an issue in Newark. I knew that he and Mary Baraka locked horns. I know he was successful in preventing a housing project going up in the North Ward. So I hunkered down with Anthony Imperiale, and I said, please, the last thing this college needs is SPONGE. And you know what? He said, Professor Price, I think you're right. There will be no SPONGE at Essex County College. Over the years after that conversation, I began to understand something about Anthony Imperiale. How embattled, threatened, endangered the old Italian community, still up in the old First Ward, felt about a city that actually was changing, but too few people were preparing the city for the change. So when we turned 350 years old in less than 2 years, we should use that moment to envision what Newark will look like. It's going to be a changed city. You see it just now. Okay. So in conclusion, and with hearty thanks, let me say that Essex County College figured prominently in the transition that placed Newark on a path toward its survival, its renaissance, its rebirth, and its optimism. A few months ago, Condé Nast magazine, Travelers magazine, rated Newark, or ranked Newark as the unfriendliest city in the United States. Mayor Baraka was upset. I was upset. People across town were upset. Unfriendly, how did they get that? All right. So about 2 weeks ago, a reporter called me and asked me, what did I think about Newark being rated as the unfriendliest city in the United States? I said, well, first of all, that is such an unfortunate thing to try to discover, given that cities, by their very nature, are complicated. You'll have people who are indeed unfriendly, we know who those people are, and then you'll have people who are enormously friendly and helpful and generous. That is what makes a city interesting. So he interviewed me for about 45 minutes, essentially asking me, why do I think that Newark is, at the beginning and end of the day, quite friendly, thank you. And I talked about my students, the boards on which I sit, my friends who may live in the suburbs, but their heart lives in Newark. And then he asked, well, what gives you optimism about the city? And I said, well, at this point, Newark seems to be restoring its reputation as a jazz city. We've got a new jazz club opening up in a couple of weeks. The Newark Museum's Jazz in the Garden series will turn 50 years old. James Moody Democracy Jazz Festival is getting ready to kick off. In 2 weeks, the Dodge Poetry Festival, the largest poetry festival in North America, will be coming back to Newark. So these are assets that any great city would want, and Newark has them. As we prepare for the 350th anniversary, I'm hoping that this college will take account of its history, the role you've played in helping Newark get back on its feet, and the role you continue to play in making this citizen feel very, very well. Thank you. Dr. Gibson will enjoy her inauguration, and I hope to be there, and I hope you all will too.
I don't know about you, but I feel quite full this year. I know that you could not receive that history lesson no other place and from no other person but Dr.